Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of the Daily Mirror and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Welcome to both of you. As ever, though, we turn our attention first of all to the front pages, starting with the Telegraph, the NHS overwhelmed. The Telegraph reports as it attempts to deliver government pledges on booster jabs. The Guardian says the National Health Service has been put on a crisis footing as hospitals in England were told to discharge as many patients as possible. The Eye splashes with Britain's race to get boosted as the NHS aims to give out 1 million third doses a day by the end of the year. The Metro pleads with its readers to sign up to the Omicron Army and get the jab. The Sun leads with its Jabs Army campaign, hoping to recruit 30,000 volunteers to help Britain reach its vaccination targets. The Times has a warning by NHS leaders that we can't hit the booster jabs target. And with a backbench rebellion looming over the latest COVID restrictions, the Express says the PM is pleading with the rebels to back him in tomorrow's vote. The Financial Times reports that business leaders have accused the Prime Minister of bringing in what they call lockdown by stealth. And the Scottish paper The National reporting First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is to give a similar televised address to those of Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer in an effort to warn the public that new restrictions may be needed. Well, we're joined by Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole from The Mirror and The Sun. Goodness me, it's all happening. The vote tomorrow, the case is racing, and all of us wondering what happens next, Harry.
Very good question. Now, those that saw Boris Johnson's clip when he visited a vaccination centre earlier today will notice quite how starkly he was refusing to say that no further restrictions will come in before Christmas. Now, officially, the line tonight from Downing Street and from Sajid Javid, the health secretary, is no plans. Now, Pippa and I will know very well that when you hear that lot say no plans, it normally means it's just around the corner. So, slightly worrying evening tonight. There is all sorts of talk flowing around about the possibility of perhaps some restrictions coming on hospitality. The Scottish Health Secretary tonight has said it's inevitable that there'll have to be more restrictions in Scotland. And if the last 18 months, 2 years have taught us anything, is where the devolved assemblies tried to sort of steal the march, you know, the rest of Whitehall tend to follow eventually. So those that think that, you know, vaccine passports and Plan B was the thin end of the wedge will probably be feeling slightly, less than smug, but, you know, certainly vindicated tonight, because it does look like that drumbeat of restrictions is getting louder and louder and louder.
Yeah, and the chair of the BMA was certainly suggesting that at the very least, staff in hospitality should be masked up now and that there should be some social distancing. Whether that's as far as it goes, we'll have to wait and see. But the theme for many of the newspapers is this enormous task to get everyone boosted, Pippa, and how overwhelming it might be for the National Health Service. And it's certainly a massive task for people, isn't it? Just to, you know, ahead of the festive season when they want to see their own families too.
It's this huge pressure on the NHS already. Before we'd even got to this point, the Health Service had warned NHS providers, had suggested that they were ready sort of at their busiest for winter, and it was only October at that point. And today, the NHS chiefs, Amanda Pritchard and Steve Parris, have upped, and their colleagues have upped the sort of the warning, if you like, the emergency level to level 4, which is the top one for hospitals. And the NHS is undertaking a whole load of measures. The ones we've heard about, obviously, from Sajid Javid and the Prime Minister, most obviously are cancelling lots of non-urgent operations. Cancer care is going to go ahead, and also operations for people that have been in the system for a very long time. But there's also, it goes broader than that. They're going to start discharging patients into care homes and back to their own homes. You know, that sets the alarm bells ringing, doesn't it? I mean, clearly the sort of COVID procedures are much much better and stricter than they were at the start of the pandemic. But so many people died in care homes because, in part, infections were sent into, people were discharged from hospital and sent into those homes. Staff have been, NHS staff, or sorry, not NHS staff, but health workers have been flown in or are being flown in from countries like Greece and Spain and being put up in hotels to help bolster already exhausted NHS staff. The military is being drafted in to help with the logistical side of the operation. But despite all of that, the NHS already looks like it's overwhelmed, with the booking site crashing today, lateral flow tests running out, or rather it's the distribution of the lateral flow tests that's the problem rather than the actual supply, we're told. And I have to say, it doesn't really look very encouraging in terms of how the NHS is going to be able to cope with all this added pressure as the Omicron variant spreads and more people end up in hospital.
Yeah, and the whole idea of the race between virus and vaccine is all part of the déjà vu that we're all feeling, is it not, Harry? Daily Telegraph picks up on those points you mentioned, Pippa. NHS overwhelmed after millions answered the call for jabs. And again, the Metro, a bit like your paper too, sign up to the army, the vaccine army, trying to drum up all these people who can come and give vaccines, as we see some of the pictures of the several hours of queuing for people to drop in and try and get that jab today.
Absolutely, and I think overwhelmed, I think, is probably a bit much, actually, tonight. 400, I think it's over 450,000 people have heeded that call to get their jab so far. There's been some rumblings about the booster rollout, and actually looked like the reason the numbers weren't particularly soaring was the fact is that 39-year-olds and 40-year-olds have only recently been able to sign up for it. There's clearly a massive demand for boosters, and it's the sort of bureaucracy that slowed these things down. Now, come the vast inquiry that's meant to be starting in the spring, allegedly, into COVID, I really do think an important part of it is now going to is why did it have to be this great big rush? You know, the Joint Centre for Vaccines and Immunisation, I believe they're called, have dragged their feet all summer on approving boosters and jabs for teens. And something clearly went very wrong there, because it's been completely back-ended now into this great big rush, when actually other countries like Israel, America have been doing very well as well in some parts of America, have been doing this for a long time. And actually we are sort of almost playing catch-up when we didn't really necessarily need to. Now the PM's out and about in our paper certainly tomorrow, joined by Camilla, who is saying essentially, join us, help us. If we're going to get to this 1 million jabs a day, which they need to by the end of the year, and that's only 20 days away, then they're going to need all the help they can get. So we're trying to do our bit to help 30,000 volunteers sign up for the Jabs Army, something we've been running since January, and it's good to see other papers like the Metro and I understand the Mail tomorrow joining in our campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Get as many people as possible to get it as fast as possible. In the meantime, let's head to the politics, shall we? Daily Express focusing on that. Well, how big is it going to be? I mean, could it be as big, Pippa, as the actual majority now? Is that the prediction?
That is absolutely the prediction tonight, that you could be looking at up to 80 Tory rebels over the COVID passport element of the further restrictions which are being voted on tomorrow. There's a couple of other bits. There's face masks, obviously, and then there's the self-isolation measures. But the really controversial one is those COVID passports, crucially not vaccine passports, because they also have the aspect of negative tests, also working to get people into places. Sajid Javid angered more MPs tonight when he announced that the booster jab is likely to be required in order to have that, to be able to receive that passport. I think it's very, very, very problematic for the government. They are faced with, at a time which probably quite possibly is the Prime Minister's low point of his premiership for all sorts of different reasons. They're facing his biggest rebellion yet, and it'd be incredibly damaging for his authority if it has to go back, it has to go through on the back of Labour votes, which it looks like it will. And there's also the aspect that question about sort of quantity of scale, isn't there? And the more rebels there are, the more they're likely to be, because it's harder for the whips to threaten ultimately a third or a quarter of the Conservative parliamentary party. So it's going to be a tough day for the whips tomorrow, a tough day for Boris Johnson, but ultimately it looks like that this measure will get through. And
is that why, do you think, Harry, we heard some of those big numbers today, that Omicron represents More than 20% of cases in England already, 44% in London. Sajid Javid saying he expects it to be dominant, the dominant variant in the capital in the next 48 hours. I know the PM said by Tuesday, didn't he? And also that in terms of raw numbers, infections rather than confirmed cases, it could already be daily 200,000 cases a day of Omicron. Is that why those that point was being made so loudly today?
Absolutely, and that's why you saw the PM on the television last night trying to almost sort of jump up and down and sort of cut through that sort of noise of here we go again to actually come on, people, please wake up. This is important. And there are some very incredibly stark numbers around today. This is what the Prime Minister and Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance have been talking about, the sort of drumbeat of exponential growth. The numbers get very scary very quickly. They get very large very quickly. Now, we still know it's beginning to appear that the Omicron variant is hopefully a milder variant than Alpha and Delta and the original Wuhan strain. But it's just a numbers game in the end. If there's 1 million people that have it, statistically speaking, a percentage of them are going to have to be hospitalized, whether it's a mild illness for most people or not. And that's where it gets to the sort of scary stage of back to that, NHS being under strain and what can you do? And the most obvious ones that we sort of talked about just at the top of this discussion is obviously there is some low-hanging fruit for the sort of halfway house to lockdown officials who point to hospitality, who point to large gatherings. And I suspect, I was talking to a very senior member of the government tonight, and I was going back and forth with them on what could possibly happen. And they said, look, Christmas is going to be fine. You're going to be able to see your family at Christmas, but don't necessarily make too many plans for New Year's Eve if you're planning on going out. And that was quite a stark moment, really.
Yeah, and get to Christmas safely, I guess, too. And certainly in terms of the, whether we can compare with South Africa and this question of milder, there were figures out from Denmark today showing that the hospitalisation rate in Denmark is comparable with the Delta variant. So I think we just wait and see, don't we, on that question of milder. One of many questions, I should say, that are still hanging in the balance. And, Pippa's talk us through this story in The Guardian then, which is that Dominic Raab, the paper says, is to outline a sweeping overhaul of human rights law that he claims will counter wokery and political correctness.
I know, well, this has been a fight that has been on the cards for some time. The government has obviously promised to try and produce a Bill of Rights, a British Bill of Rights, I think it's been deemed as, for a while now. And ultimately, it's about the Human Rights Act, which has enshrined the European Convention of Human Rights into law. And the government has used some quite, shall we say, inflammatory language when it talks about tackling wokery and so forth. But I think what they're trying to argue is a lot of this is aimed at foreign criminals. They claim that 70% of human rights cases under the law are brought by foreign national offenders who cite a right to family life, trying to avoid deportation. But they haven't, of course, provided the actual figures, so we've just got to take their word for it. And Dominic Raab is saying that he's going to make sure that it defends the new Bill of Rights, typically British rights, like trial by jury and freedom of speech. And I think probably quite a lot of other countries would like to think of those rights as typically their own as well. And critics, which includes top lawyers, Law Society, and Liberty, the human rights group, suggest that this is potentially going to undermine our human rights and, crucially, our reputation globally, which currently is as being a strong advocate of human rights domestically. That it could potentially undermine that. And I think it's their concern is not that there aren't changes that could be made to the legislation, but that by trying to sort of pull the primacy back to Parliament for domestic law and using some of this possibly quite incendiary language, they're injecting politics into the whole process, which, as I think we'd all applaud our legal system for being independent. Harry's laughing there. Clearly doesn't feel as strongly about defending human rights as I do. But let's hear what he has to say.
Okay, quickly, Harry.
This is going to be an almighty Barney, because everyone on both sides of this argument are both utterly convinced they both not necessarily are just right, but have the moral high ground as well. So it's going to be a proper bum fight. Dominic Raab, I think, realises the level of sort of anger this sort of thing is going to cause in the legal world. So I think we'll see tomorrow in the small print that fundamentally he's actually going to disappoint Tory MPs because he's not taking an axe to the Human Rights Act. He's not going to take anything out of it, as many Tory MPs have demanded for years, as the Tory manifesto implied it would. Instead, this Bill of Rights is going to be sort of bolting bits onto it, sort of almost putting post-it notes over the Human Rights Act to go, well, yes, this bit, but only if X, Y, Z happens. So I suspect we'll be rowing and arguing about this one for many, many, many months and years to come.
Well, Harry Cole, Pippa Crerar, thank you both very much indeed.